Welcome back. Here we are again, getting ready to learn a little more about FamilySearch. And this time we're going to talk about the descendancy chart, something that many of us are familiar with, but others aren't. So what we'll do today is we'll talk a little bit about what descendancy research means. We'll discuss some duplicate issues in tree. We'll talk about the descendancy view itself and explain it and how it works, and then demonstrate how we can use this tool to help us find new people to add into FamilySearch. Okay, so what is descendancy research? Well, for decades and for virtually a century, the big push from the church was to do our ancestors. Well, as many of us filled out our ancestor charts, that became a very difficult thing to do if we were trying to find new names. And so the church started a paradigm shift a few years ago to suggesting that we work on our descendancies, because there were a lot more names in the descendancies that needed to be done than there were in our ancestors. And so the descendants are those that descend or are the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of our ancestors. And it is probably the best way for most of us, many of us, to find new people to add to tree, especially if we're not new converts. Okay, could they have all been done? Because that's always been one of the favorite excuses for people, is when they don't want to do family history as well, it's all done. But quite frankly, if you're doing ancestors only, it's possible that you're pretty close to that and you can't find many more people. But if you take an ancestor that's, say, 8 generations back, a 6th great-grandfather or grandmother, and you look at their descendants, you're probably going to see approximately 500,000 or so, more or less, descendants for that couple. There's 512 of them in your tree. And so you can see that there's a lot of people there, and it's physically impossible that they could all be identified, that all the descendants have been identified for that couple, and that all the temple work's been done for all those people. And so this is where we're finding that for most of us that we can find a lot of names that still need to be added to tree. Okay, so this particular view, the descendancy view, is different than the other views that we're familiar with, and especially when you're working with a person who's new to family history, it can be very challenging. We're looking at a fan chart right now, and I went up to where the fan chart icon is mentioned up here at the top with the drop down, and we're going to look at the descendancy for this person. It will take and make a descendancy chart for the person who's in what we call the home position. Joseph E. Sands is I think, their great-grandfather. So we're going to look at his descendancy, his and Esther Lundy's descendancy. And so when I click on descendancy, the view changes to this, which is radically different from what we were looking at. At the very top of it, you're going to find the husband and wife, if there's a spouse, for the person who's in the home place on that other chart. They'll always be at the top of the list, and you'll notice that the wife has the word spouse next to it so that we know this is a person who married the person right above them. And you'll see they're connected by lines. And then there's a line that drops down from Esther's circle there, and those are their children. Now you see a bunch of arrows on there. When an arrow's pointing downward, that means that the person has been what we would call opened. We're able to see their descent. and you'll either see a spouse and or children, and then further on down too, possibly, from that person. So they've been opened. That's why their arrows are pointing down. If somebody has no arrow, like Susanna or Elijah here, there's no arrow by their little line, that means they don't have showing a spouse or children. Often that's the person we want to look for to work with, but if you look at them, you'll notice that they're both young children. The other children in this list all have right pointing arrows. That means that they have at least a spouse and possibly children that are linked to them. And so you'll know that there's more out there when the arrow's pointing to the right. When the arrow's pointing down, it means we've already opened it to see what was out there for that person. Okay, so here's Josephine and Esther, and we're going to pick one of their children to open. We're going to look at John. Right now, we don't know anything about John other than his birth year and death year, so he lived to be about 43 years old or so. And that's all we know. But we have an arrow pointing to the right, which means there's at least a spouse and children. And so when we click on it, this opens up the part that's in red. And he does have a wife, Angeline, and he has 3 children that we know of, Fanny, Mary, and Charles. And we see them just by clicking on that one little arrow. And now the arrow points down for John and Angeline, meaning their family's been opened up for viewing in this chart. And again, you'll see Angeline is the spouse. And they mark that because remember when we're talking about who can we do work for? We can do work for all the descendants, anybody that's shown in this list. But for the ones that are marked spouses, we're not to do their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents unless they also happen to be related to us some other way. Now, at the top of the descendancy chart, you'll see the drop-down where we picked descendancy before, and next to it is a little options menu, and that's important to pay attention to. When you click on that, you get this option menu. One of the first things you can do is you can choose to open up more of this chart than what was showing. Right now, the default is 2 generations. When it's generated, you get the person and their spouse that you start with, and the generation 2 is their children. If I click it on 3, it would then show all the grandchildren, like we have in John Sand's family down there, but it would be for everybody in the chart. Or the maximum, which is 4 generations, which would give you the great-grandchildren of Joseph and Esther in this case. And so you can open it up to 4 generations in one fell swoop. That can be challenging for somebody who's never done this before because there'll be a lot of lines there. You'll see that on some of the others. It's a little bit hard to follow, especially for the uninitiated. You'll also see some things that you can set to show. And I would recommend that you show, if you're doing this to get temple ordinances, show the ordinance status for the people. Show record hints, because that's the great tool for adding names to the system. Research suggestions, I don't see as that important. You can mark it if you want. Data problems you definitely want to see so you know if there's some issues there. Portraits I turn off. Nice to have portraits, but then it makes every person, instead of being this big, they become about 4 times the size because you have to have that circle, which then makes the list that much longer to have to weed, to go through. And so I would recommend you turn off portraits. That's just a big distraction in my mind. You can also turn it into dark mode where it reverses everything. Instead of having dark print on a light background, you would have light print on a dark background for those that have eye problems, and that makes it easier for them to see. Okay, so those are the things that you can adjust, and it will, once you adjust it, it'll stay that way until you make any changes. Okay, the icons for the temple are pretty common, should know them fairly well. Green means there's ordinance, that can be reserved. They may already be reserved and shared, but you'll be able to reserve them. There's something there you can reserve. Blue means there's something in progress. It could either be somebody else has reserved them and not shared them, or they have printed them, and so therefore they're not available to you, or they could be your shared ordinances. It could be a person that you had reserved and shared. So there's 2 or 3 things there that could cause those. The orange means there's more information needed usually, and those are great to work with because often they're masking temple work that needs to be done that fixes minimal. And gray means that there's nothing needed for that ordinance. Now, in the descendancy view, they don't have a gray box for the people. When all their work is done, you just won't see any indication of a need for temple work on that line. If there's nothing there in the way of green or blue or orange boxes, then you can just assume the work is finished and complete for that person. When you go to a person's page, they'll have little individual gray boxes for each of the ordinances that are done. But on the pedigree chart or on the descendancy chart, it's just nothing showing is equivalent to gray. Then you have the record hints, and like I said before, those are great because those are the place where you find sources often that can add people to your family. And then the data problems, they often can be easily fixed. Oftentimes it's just a typo or something like that. If it's something major and you come to a person that has this and it's going to take a lot of work to fix it, I would just skip over it. There's plenty of other fish in the sea. You don't need to worry about it if it's a hard fix to do. And another thing that you may see when you go to somebody who has a green temple is the fact that there are duplicates that are needed. They will not let you reserve that ordinance until the duplicates are cleared up. So just be aware of that. Again, that could be a major issue. Okay, and you may just want to skip it because sometimes it's not a merge, it's a whole slew of merges that need to be done. The other thing to be aware of is, remember, the 2 types of green temples. Plain green temple means that person's ordinance needs to be reserved. Nobody's reserved it. You'll be given 2 years, and you'll get a year extension if you do any ordinances on that person. The green temple with the clock means that it's been reserved by somebody else, shared with the temple. You can now reserve it, but you only be given 120 days, and you can't reshare that name. You can't take a shared name from the temple and share it back to the temple or share it into a group. You just have to do it. There's no way to share a shared. Okay. So in other words, this lesson is going to help us find our aunts and uncles, their cousins and their spouses and their children. And that's the essence of descendancy research. Okay, duplicates. You know, there's thousands of them in tree if you haven't already figured that out. I think we all have. And anytime you put a new person in a tree, even when the system says there's no duplicate, there's liable to be one lurking around, so be careful. In fact, FamilySearch used to be very generous in supplying us with suggestions for duplicates. But the problem was if they suggested a bad pair, people would go ahead and do it because, well, FamilySearch suggested it. So FamilySearch backed out and said, we're only going to suggest things that we really think are duplicates. And so they pass over a lot of duplicates that are out there already. And so it's up to us to find those and merge them together so that you don't have a ton of duplicates like you see in the picture there, which is a picture of a ward with all the twins that were in that ward that day. And our tree sometimes looks a little bit like that. And our job is to remove all of them that we can. You know, sometimes you feel like that's bad, but quite frankly, it's the good thing to do because it cuts down on duplicate temple work. And quite frankly, I've found many times when I added a person and then I find a duplicate of that person and merge them together, the one that was already in tree needed its work done anyway. So I still need to do the work. I've just eliminated a duplicate. Okay, analyzing them. The reason you have so many is that when the system looks for duplicates, it looks at this. It looks to see if the dates and places are alike and if the relationships are alike. And if they don't find much commonality, they will not recommend the two people to be marked as possible duplicates. So for the case of argument, let's just say these are two people that are duplicates. They will never be marked or probably never be marked in FamilySearch as duplicates because of the following. The first guy on top doesn't have a middle name like the one on the bottom, so their names don't match. Their birth for the guy on the top is just an approximate date and a state. The one on the bottom has an actual date and a county and state. The bottom one has a death date, the top one doesn't. The top one has parents, but the bottom one doesn't. The bottom one has a wife, but the top one doesn't. With all those differences, there is no way FamilySearch is going to mark these two people as the same person. And part of the reason is that guy on the top, even though he does have parents that the bottom guy doesn't have, really doesn't have much identifying information. You need to add more. And that's one of the reasons why duplicates don't show up is you have one that's really packed like John Anderson Brown and one like John Brown that doesn't have much information. And those two just don't line up for duplicates. So as you're looking at duplicates, try to add more information to a record. Don't create a person with one source and then go and do the temple work for them. Try to find some more sources because that will add more detail to the person and make it easier to find that possible duplicate. Adopt the attitude that the record probably has a duplicate unless you can't find it. Most of the time we like to operate with, okay, I found a new guy. Unless the system shows me there's a duplicate, I'm okay to go. No, it should be the other way around. I found a guy. Now I'm going to go out and try to find a duplicate, and I'll do this record I found only if I can't find a duplicate. And then the bottom line is, remember, our goal is to try to keep the tree to one record for each person. And that's what we're trying to do. So cleaning up duplicates is just as vital as adding new people to tree in many respects. Okay, final suggestions for using this view, and then we'll go use it. Take advantage of those icons. Look for people in the descendancy that don't have a spouse or show a spouse and don't have children, or maybe only show one child. This is often your golden place to find new people. When you go to open up a person to look at their person page, I recommend that you right-click on the person in the Descendancy View and say open in a new tab. It is designed that you can just click on the person and it'll open a new tab and erase the descendancy, and then you can use the back arrow to get to where you were, but that does not always work. And then you lose your place on this long list of people, and you're going to regret it. I try to always open up a new person on a new tab or a new window. Work all the hints. When you see hints, work them all. And now that we're in the 2025, use the AI tools that are available. Use everything you've got at your disposal to do this work. Work the descent view in sequence, top to bottom or bottom to top. I like to go to the bottom because most people would just start at the top and work their way down. So the guys at the very bottom of the chart are probably been worked on less than the ones at the top because they're hidden down at the bottom. And then take notes where you're going, because this is one of those cases where there's nothing left in the system to help you very well other than the last people you viewed. You can go to that view and see previous people, but it's nice if you keep notes and you know exactly where you're working. So you can come back tomorrow and take up where you left off, or if you accidentally scramble the page and lose your location, you can get back where you were. Okay, let's do some demos. So if I'm working for a patron, I'll go into their helper resources, open up their tree, play around in it, and find a person where I want to start. This just happens to be my tree. I went back to, I think it's my third or fourth great grandmother, Henrietta Sophia Neidig, and said, okay, let's start with her. So I clicked on her and I said, let's see your person page. And so it came up and I decided, here's Henrietta here. You know, that's my ancestor. I've done a lot of work on her. Let's try one of her siblings. So I switched over to Anna Christina. So now we see Anna Christina's page. See, she's married to Philip Kramer, and they have a bunch of kids. So this sounds like it'd be a good descendancy to work from. I'm starting with in the 1750s, so it's a little bit earlier than when the church was organized. These people didn't join the church. Their descendants didn't join the church for a couple of hundred years. And so it isn't necessary that I go back that far, but this is how far I decided to go back. Okay, so I went and did her descendancy page. Here's Anna Christina and Philip right here. They have so many descendants, I broke the page in the middle. So this is a few hundred people missing right here in the middle. So you could see the very beginning, the very bottom. Like I said, I like to go to the bottom. So I went down to the very bottom. I left out the very last person, but I stopped at their daughter Magdalene. And you notice her last name has been scrambled a little bit to Kramer from Kramer. But that's often happens with Germans because spellings didn't mean much. And she married an Alexander Cochrane. They have the orange temples, and they show no children because there's no arrow on Alexander, the spouse. And this is an old view. It doesn't have the word spouse, or some of these are older views. Okay, so I went to their page, and this is the family after I opened it up and I discovered, oh, there's some duplicates around. I did the merging of the duplicates, and after merging, all I was able to do is I've got full birth and death dates for Alexander, already had them for Mary Magdalene, and it added one child. Okay, I thought, well, that's kind of unusual back in the 1700s, early 1800s. It's possible there's other children. And so I like to usually work from knowing something and trying to find it than not knowing anything. So I like to kind of fudge a little bit. So I went and looked for this couple in Ancestry. And knowing they had that one child, I found this family. There was only one tree with them. That was interesting. It's not very well researched. And sure enough, in that family, Thomas Beale Cochrane is right there. And he has at least 4 siblings that this person found that had birth and death dates, and a couple of children that don't, which may or may not even fit into the family. But this gives me a feel that there's more out there. That's the whole point. I'm not going to copy any of this into tree. I am going to, though, keep my eyes open to see if I can find a William, a John, a Cornwallis or an Isaiah that fit into this family or somebody else. So back at FamilySearch, looking at the father, he has a source, and it's an Ohio death. Remember, we want to look at these hints because sometimes they'll help us add people. Is this a record of Alexander's death or somebody else's death where Alexander's mentioned? Well, it turns out to be the latter. This is a hint for a child, an Elizabeth A. Lees, whose parents are Alexander Cochrane and Mary Cromer. And those are her parents. She was born in the 1830s, and that fits the time frame. Born in Maryland, that fits the location. She obviously married because it's showing her last name at death, her married name, which is Lees, instead of Cochrane. So I go to source this record, my source, mom and dad. I'm ready to put her in. It has her full birth and death and burial information. All I'll have to do is click add. When I do that, the system will check for a duplicate. But of course, it's going to be looking for a duplicate whose last name is Lees. And people in the tree are normally recorded by their maiden names, the women. And so I doubt it's going to find a duplicate. And sure enough, and I clicked, it didn't show me any duplicates. It just said, go ahead and fix it. You know, go ahead and create this person if you want. One thing I did is I changed her last name to Cochrane because that's what it really should be. And then I created her. When I created her, the first thing I did is look for duplicates because that's what you should do. And knowing that I just changed her name on that create a person page meant that the system had not searched for her as Elizabeth Cochrane. So I needed to for sure. And sure enough, even with this old page, you can see that I found a duplicate. She's married to Samuel Lees, so I know Mr. Lee's full name. He has the birth and death dates that I need. They're the same as the record I have up here. This top one's my record. The bottom one was her record. Let me get back where we were. And so I'll go ahead and merge them. When I merge them, that brought in her husband and 3 children who were already in tree. But see, by doing that merge, it didn't hurt anything. In fact, what I've got now is I've got a husband and a wife, Elizabeth and her husband, who need temple work, all their temple work. The child, William, needs his work. The child, Mary, needs to be sealed to her parents, but the other work was done. And the last child, Sarah, was all done. So I can kind of guess that Sarah is an ancestor probably of somebody who's joined the church. And they're working their way back up the tree. And I know that there's still more children probably out there. And so, you know, that's the thing that's fun here is that you open up Pandora's box and there may be a whole string of people that you can add from that one suggestion. Okay, now this is 2025, so let's incorporate AI with this. So here's another descendancy chart. And in the middle of it, I have found Annetta Mahaffey. I opened her up. You can see that because the arrow points down and it just shows us a spouse. So there's no children here. They both show that they've got temple work that can be done. In fact, when I click on Barney, I see that somebody's reserved and shared with the temple everything except sealing to parents, and he didn't reserve sealing to parents, even though there's obviously parents because it's allowing you to do that sealing. And I'm allowed to do it because I'm related through the wife as a cousin of mine. He's related to me, so I can do his work because it's back before the 110-year rule. Okay, so let's look at Barney. All we have is a birth year, don't have any death information. And so I look at his sources. He's only got one, and it was an Ontario, Canada marriage record. And I thought, oh, good grief, Canada. I'm not an expert on Canada research, but I've got faith that I can handle it. So we look for hints. There was nothing listed over there in hints. Darn it. So then I said, okay, let's try the AI research assistant and ask, who are his children? Because we know they're married. And it says, no children were found. Thanks a lot. But at least we tried. Now, underneath research help is where you would find the link to go search for FamilySearch records. So we'll try that. And there wasn't much. There were a whole 6 suggestions. This name is so odd. I couldn't even get a long list of suggestions. And of course, the one hint or the one suggestion was the source that's already been connected, the Ontario marriage record. So it appears that's the only record for this guy at FamilySearch that's been indexed. So let's try the things that aren't indexed. Let's try full text search over in labs. So I tried that, found 3 results, but none of them are in Canada. And I'd left that wide open. I just did a search on his name. Now, I'll tell you right now, the biggest issue that was the reason for this, with no results or hardly any results coming up, is the spelling of the last name. I wasn't sharp enough at this point to realize there were variations. I should have seen it because it was right here on this page. The first guy, no, wait, I guess not. I thought I was seeing it, but I didn't. Oh, right here. Barney B. Kaminsky with an I-S-K-Y instead of an E-S-K-Y. That's a variation of this name, but I didn't notice that. And so I went with what I knew was the spelling the way it was, thinking maybe it would be that way all the time, which was wishful thinking. So anyway, basically didn't find anything. So now it's time to go over to Ancestry and see if I can find something there using their suggested records on other records, their little AI tool, as I call it. So we'll go to Ancestry. When we searched, the very first thing that came up on the list was that Ontario marriage record. I want to look at that. I want to look at the record, not the actual image, but the record, the transcription, so that I can see the suggested records for MIT. And there were 4 suggestions. So I thought, okay, I wonder what I can learn from this. Well, the first one is about a son, Vern Franklin Kaminsky, spelled with an I, who was born in 1888 in Canada to Barney. And notice how Barney's last name was spelled Chomsky and Nettie Mahaffey. Okay, so there's a child I didn't know about. The second one was a birth record from Ontario for Florence Julia Kaminsky with the I. So now we have 2 new children. The third one was just a city directory, but it lets me know that he was living in the Toronto area in 1892. So he's staying there. Then the bottom one was interesting, Washington marriage records. Well, it's that son Vern from up on top, and he apparently came to the States, and in 1911 he married an Ethel Reed in the Seattle area, King County, Washington. And notice his last name is spelled even different. It's I-S-K-E-Y. So there was yet another variation. Now, Dad was named in the first 2 of these, and the parents are also listed on the bottom one. So the 3 for the kids The parents are all listed, but we never found anything at FamilySearch. Well, knowing the spellings that are used now, I was able to go back into FamilySearch and actually find all 4 of these. And so they were there. It was just they were buried based on the spellings. That's why it's nice to go over to Ancestry, see what they find, look at the original record, and then come back to FamilySearch and try to duplicate what you found. Because sometimes things are there and you don't see them in this case. Okay, so after adding the 4 records, you'll notice that everybody in the family needs some more temple work. Much of it had already been reserved and shared with the temple, but it can be reserved by you and done. There's also a 3rd child that was found later. And so she'll get added to this family group, and she needed her work done too. So see, so often you start with one name and you end up with a whole family worth of temple work that you can do. Okay, here's another one. This is another view of the family. There's Barney and his wife that we started with. After a couple of hours of research, this is what the tree looked like now coming down. And so you know that there's a lot of names that got added. And it's because once you get started, you keep building on them as you work your way down until you reach that 110-year rule. And you'll be surprised sometimes how many people you can add. Okay, another example, buried over here behind the pop-up is Nora Nina Zoll. And she lives to be 83. She has no arrow by her name, so it means there's no husband showing or anything. It was real easy to find a husband. I just went to find a grave, and he's listed right there on the find a grave record. So knowing that and knowing her name, we went looking in records at FamilySearch, and we found an Indiana marriage record for Nora Nina Zoll and her husband, Thomas Raymond Black. And so it was easy then to be able to source this and add the husband to her. Okay. And if you notice, that source there, though, said it was already attached. It was attached to Nora. But when we went and looked at it, nobody attached the husband. That's why there's no husband showing. So when we attached it to him, it created a record for him, and now he's in tree. And by the time I finished with other records that we could find, we also found a daughter and added her. And so we had 3 people that we could work off of and try to do work for, just from basically finding that find a grave and realizing that there was a husband. Okay, adding a person from a hint. We'll go down here to Thomas Evans Sands. He has a wife. You can see the green temple, so you know there's ordinances out there. It has a clock, so there's ordinances you can reserve. This is all there is, just him and his wife, Mary. So again, no children. That should be your first question. There isn't much there. So let's see if we can uncover something. We have nothing on his wife other than her name. She doesn't even have dates. Okay, so the husband has some hints. They're all pertaining to his death or marriage. First one's a marriage. We already had that. The other 2 are on his death. But when I looked at the 3rd one, at the transcription page in FamilySearch, the information up there wasn't very helpful, but I noticed a picture at the bottom. This is a record. This is showing you the record it came from. And anytime I'm working in burial records, cemetery records, and I see a source like that, that tells me right away, even before I open it up, this is a transcript of somebody going up and down the rows in a cemetery, copying down everything on every stone that was there. Oftentimes you'll find some interesting things there. The thing that's nice is they usually don't alphabetize the names. They just show you the names as the person walked down the row, so you know who's buried next to whom. So let's look at that original document. There's Thomas's record. Thomas E. Sands. He was only 36 years old when he died, and his stone said, "Meet me in heaven." I love this extra little stuff that's added. But what was really interesting was right above him. Here is a record for a child of Thomas and Mary named Carrie, who only lived 3 years, 8 months, and 7 days. Died in 1875. A bud snatched from its parent stem. How sweet. But she was not listed anywhere. I hadn't found her anywhere. But now I had a record for her, and I could go and add her into tree. And when I did, I actually ended up finding 4 different birth and death records on her. There was no duplicate of her in tree. So her sealing to parents is able to be submitted. I did find her mother, Mary, who's really Mary Jane Goheen. She was in tree because after Thomas died, she remarried an Allison Fashnot. And so her record was there. And so we were able to merge that with the record I had of Mary. And all of her ordinances were done because of the other Mary that we found, except for the sealing of her to Thomas, because the people that put her in with Allison didn't know about Thomas. So we had an ordinance that we could do there. So there were a couple of ordinances from this. But as often you find surprises like this, it's really fun. Okay, in conclusion, descendancy research can be really rewarding, and I find it fun to do because you never know what you're going to uncover. Let the spirit guide you to the place to go and tree. And that's really true because there's a lot of places you can go and millions of names you could search through. Let the spirit take you where the spirit wants you to go. Try to find multiple sources for these people. Don't just go with one. Really try to find if there are duplicates so that you're not creating more problems. And then all the people in the descendancy chart are okay to submit. Just don't wander off onto those families of the people labeled as spouses. Don't go back up their tree unless you're related to them some other way. And good luck. Hope you have fun with it, and we'll see you again soon. We do these classes about every other week. And so in a couple of weeks, we'll have another one for you. So have a good day, and we will see you later.